Hello guys, welcome to Java Spring Boot tutorial for beginners. In this video we are going to see how to implement REST API using Spring Boot. For this we are going to do a simple CRUD application. That is, we are going to have API for create, read, update and delete. To get started we are going to make use of the Spring initializer. You visit the website start.spring.io. Over here we can generate a Spring project to get started with. For that I'm going to choose Java as the language, and we're going to make use of Maven for dependencies and stuff. And down here I'm going to pick the latest available as at this time. And for the Java version, I'm making use of Java 17. We're going to make use of a few dependencies. So I'm going to click to add dependency. The first one is Spring Data JPA. This is for persisting data, for querying data. It makes it easy for us to interact with the data source. In this case, the database we are going to make use of. I'm going to select that, and then let's add dependency for database. For that, I'm going to make use of MySQL. So we select MySQL driver and add, and that's about it. I'll go ahead and click generate, and this will download the file. The file has downloaded as a zip file. I'll locate and unzip the content. Unzip, so here we have our project folder. What I'll do now is to open the IntelliJ, our IDE, the IDE I'm using, and import this new project into IntelliJ. Drag and drop, and IntelliJ opens and download dependencies and other stuff. I'll wait for that download to complete, then we proceed. With the installation completed, let's go ahead and enter the values we need to connect to the database. For that, I'll go to src main resources application.properties. Here is the file we are going to enter the information we need to connect to the database. I'm going to paste these values. The first line, DDL auto, is for Hibernate to automatically generate our database tables using the entity files, and also sync the two together in case there is any change in the entity. This is something we can use in development when we don't want to go through the migrations route, which is outside the scope of this tutorial. Then here we have our JDBC URL. For database username, I'm going to make use of root. That is the username of my MySQL database. For password, it is empty for my case, so you change all these according to your own database credentials. And what else? I'm going to uncomment this. Yeah. So these are my credentials for connecting to database. You change according to your own use case. For database name, by the way, mine is called demo. I will save that. I want to run the application to be sure that there is no error with database connection. So I'll go to demo application.java, right click and run. If we don't get database connection error, then our database connection was okay. Alright, so we have connected to the database. Now let's think about our goal for this application again. We are trying to create a REST API CRUD endpoint, that is for create, read, update and delete. So what is it that we want to create, read, update and delete? We can pick anything, any random thing. Let's just call it to do. For that, I'm going to right click over here and create a new package. Let's call that to do. Our package name. Then I'll come over here, right click. The first thing I want to create is the class for the entity, our to-do entity. That is the guy that will be mapped to the table in our database. So I'm going to call this to do. It's of type class. I'll hit enter. To mark this file as an entity file, we use the annotation at entity. This way, Hibernate Spring Boot is going to generate our table, a table called to do, in the database. Then we begin to specify those properties that should be mapped to the columns in the table. The first one I want to have is the ID column. This is going to be the primary key auto incremented ID column, integer column. So we say private integer ID. For this special column, we say at ID. And because it's auto-generated, we use generated value and strategy for that generation. Generation strategy, okay, type.auto. Then the next field I want to have is private string title for our to-do. We can as well add column here at column annotation. And finally, I want to have status. So I just want to have these three columns in the to-do table. Before we get to the business of the day, the main business of the day, which is REST API, we have one more thing to do, and that is to implement a repository interface for our to-do. The repository is going to handle the interaction with our data source, our database. So for that, I'm going to come over here and create a new file. This is going to be an interface. Say to do repository. Hope I got that correct. I'll select interface and hit enter. Now we are not going to write all the codes for implementing the interface ourselves. We're going to make use of the dependency, the Spring Data JPA dependency that we installed. For that, I'm going to say this extends, not implement, this is an interface. This extends JPA repository. So for the generic type, we say to do, this is our entity class, and the next value there is the primary key type, which is an integer. So this is our to do, this is the primary key type. And that's about it. All we have to do to implement the repository, at least for a basic CRUD operation. Before we get to controller and start defining the REST endpoints, let's do one additional thing, and that is to have a service class. So for that, I'm going to create a new file, class to do service. And here we can use at service annotation. Over here, we're just going to have a bunch of methods for create, read, update, and delete. So let's bring in the repository, private to do repository, and Spring can auto wire that for us at auto wire. The first method I want to have is the method to save a to do. So we can say public, this will return a to do. Let's call this create, or let's call it save, and this will take a to do. We simply return repository.save to do. So we're going to pass to do when we try to save a to do. You can go further and make a DTO and all that if you want to. Let's keep this as simple as possible. The next method will be to find a to do by the ID. So I want to say public to do find one. This will take the ID of the to do we want to retrieve. And over here I want to return to do repository dot find by ID, the ID. Why? Okay, this is going to return optional because the to do with that ID might not exist. So we say optional to do here. And finally, I want to delete a to do. So I'll say public void delete. Once again, the ID of the to do I want to delete, return to, no, not returning anything, to do repository.delete, delete by ID, the ID. All right, so those are the methods I want to have here. Now let's head over to the controller. For that, I will create a new file, to do controller. So the first step is to tell Spring that this is going to be a controller. We use the decorator at controller. One more thing, we want to define request mapping with a base path, a path for our to-dos. What that means is I'm going to do request mapping. So there is one dependency that I forgot to install when we generated this project. We are going to add that right away. I'll comment this out for now and head over to the browser. When we generated this project, we added these two dependencies, the Spring Data JPA and MySQL driver. There's one more dependencies we supposed to have added, and that is Spring Starter Web dependency. That is web, Spring Web. For that, I'll head over to Maven Central, and we're going to search for that dependency and add it. So over here, I will search for Spring Start. Let me just type Starter Web. And hold on, Spring Boot Starter Web. Yeah, this one. I'm going to click on that, copy it over to the IDE. Click on copy, head over to pom.xml, and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, and then make sure to sync the dependency so that this additional one will be downloaded. Now I will go back to the controller and try to do what I was doing before. Request mapping, that comes from the new dependency that we just added. And I want everything about to-dos to go through the path to-dos. That means if, for example, our API URL is localhost 8080, to access the to-do endpoint is going to be localhost 8080/todos/ the next thing. Before we continue with this controller, I want to quickly remove this version from the dependency we just got from Maven Central. For this Spring Boot Starter dependencies, we don't need to specify the version. All right, so I'll go back to the controller. I want to begin to define the endpoint. The first one is going to be public to do create. Let's just call it create. For this, I will eventually make use of a DTO, that is data transfer object representation, what we want to use to create a to-do. I'm going to head over to to-do folder or package and create another package called DTOs. Let's just call it DTO. Here I'm going to have create to-do DTO, and here I want to have public string, this can be private string title and private string status. We need the getter and setter, so generate getter and setter, and that should be it. For our create to do, this method is going to accept request body of type create to do DTO. Let's call that DTO. So over here, before that, let's make use of the to do service that we just created. We're going to say private to do service, and once again Spring auto wire at auto wired. So here I'm going to construct a new to do. Let's say to do to be equal to new to do. So we are going to set the title and status only. The ID will be auto generated. We said to do dot set. Let me go to do. Okay, here we need some getter and setter. We did not generate that before. I'm going to have getter and setters for the 3 fields we have in this class. So over here I want to do actually let's do this in the service class instead of in the controller. I'm going to copy this guy, head over to the service, and what I'm going to have here in the save, or let me call this create, is going to be the DTO. So over here I can construct the to do to be equal to new to do dot set dot set title is DTO dot title, get title. We do similar thing for the status, to do dot set status to be DTO dot get status, and finally we save that to do. All right, so I'll head over to the controller and I'll simply return the to do service dot create. We pass the DTO. Before we proceed to the other endpoints, let's test this to see if it actually works. The first thing I want to check is whether the database tables are being created, that is using our entity class. For that I'm going to run the application, right click, run, and then while the application is starting I will head over to my database. This is my demo database that I connected to. The application has started. What I will do is to refresh the database to see, okay, here I have the table created, my to-do table with the columns, the ID, the status, and the title. And when we look at the structure, we can see that this ID is primary key column. So our database is fine. Now we head over to Postman to test the endpoint. For that I'll go to this predefined. So the base URL is localhost 8080, that's the default I believe, and the path is to do's. So this is going to be a post request to /to do's endpoint. For our to do we need the title and status. I'm going to put pending and send off the request. Says this is returning a 404. Okay, so we forgot one thing, to mark this as an endpoint. This is going to be a post request, so for that we say at post mapping. Because it's going to be to /to do's, there's no need to put any other thing here. So I'm going to leave it at this, or even like this. I will go back and try to send the request one more time. Send the request. We still get a 404. Now that is strange. Why did I get a 404? at controller request mapping. What is the URL? Localhost 8080/todos. So I think I figured out what the issue might be. Because I'm not using dev-tool to auto restart the application when there are changes, what I've done is to stop the application and start it again. Let me test the endpoint, the request again, and see if we get a 404. So I'll come over here and send off the request one more time. Okay, we didn't get a 404, but we got server error. Let's see what the error is about. So my error is because of the return type of our controller. Here we intend to return JSON. For that, what I can do here is to, instead of saying that the return type is to do, we can say response entity of type to do. So over here, we are going to return new response entity and http status dot created. Let me close this down. So we are returning almost the same thing. The only difference is that we are returning a JSON response here. We are not making use of view as in MVC model view controller architecture. So I'm going to restart my application once again and head over to the browser to try to create the to-do again. I'll send off the request. Now I get the expected response of 201 created. I got ID 2 for the to-do because the first one was actually successful. The code broke at the point we tried to return the response. So it means that if I go to my to-dos table now, go to data and refresh, I should have 2 rows inserted so far. So this means that our to-do, our create to-do works, and the auto increment column, everything works. So far, so good. Now let's go ahead with finding a to-do by the ID. I'm going to stop this server, and over here I want to, this time is going to be a get request. So we're not going to make use of at post mapping. We say at get mapping. This is going to take the ID of to-do we want to find. We use the curly braces and put whatever we want to call that parameter, right? So public, next line, public response entity, once again, response entity to do find one. This will take integer, which will be the ID of the to-do of interest. In order to have access to this ID that will be in the URL when we make the request, we come here and say, not there, at path variable, just like we did for request body to access the request payload. Then the name of the variable, in this case ID. Take note that this ID refers to whatever we call the value here. It does not refer to this ID. You can call this guy anything you want, right? And then I want to come over here. We return new. This time I want to do it differently. Over here, because we created a new record, we say new response entity, the data, and the status code. So this is 201 status code. If the response status is 200, we can just say response entity.ok. This is going to return 200. And then the data we want to return. The data we want to return is to do, and write it in one line. Let me just put it here. Equal to do service dot find one, the ID. This is going to return optional, so if I don't find anything, you can throw a custom 404 error there. The data we want to return is that to do. I will save that, and we can now go over to the browser and call the endpoint to do's slash whatever ID we pass in the URL, and that is going to be a GET request. So over here, I'm going to go to find one, to do's slash one. That is the ID of the to do. I will send off the request with find to do with ID of 1. The same thing with 2. Send it, because we don't have 3, we just get an error. Okay, so our find to do works. Let's look at how to update a to do. To update a to do, let me just copy the one for create, and I'm gonna come over here. We can make this a patch or put, anyone. Let me use put, and then this is going to take in the URL the ID of the to do we want to update. Then over here we are going to say update, and just like we did up here, we get the ID, integer ID, and then the request body is going to be the same DTO we are using for create, because it has title and status, and those are the things we want to be updatable. And then down here, instead of create, we can actually use create. If it has the ID, it's going to find the item that has that ID and update it. But let me just repeat myself here. Permit me to do that. I'm going to call this one update. This is going to take integer ID, and over here I want to say to do dot set ID to be that ID, and we call save. So the method from the repository that we call is the same thing. That's what I was trying to say about create and update. Alright, so this is going to be http status.ok, not created, because this is an update. And that's about it. We can go ahead and try to update a to do. To update, I'm going to copy the item I have over here. First thing first, let's identify the to do we want to update. This to do, oh come on, I should have set up the dev tool for auto restart. So the first to do has title, cook food, and status pending. Let's just change the status to something else. For that, I'm going to come over here and paste that item. I'm going to change the status to done, right? And I'll send off the request. Oh, we just updated the second to do, by the way. Why is the ID 52? That's very strange. So I have yet another bug. Here we created a method to update. So I should be calling update and pass the ID here. Then let's go over to the update. I don't want to create a new to do. What I want to do is to find the to do that already exists. So what I need to do here is to do repository.find, or we can just do this.find one. This.find one, the ID. At this point, we don't have any other option, I guess, than to throw an exception if we don't find a to do. Because we are not creating a new record, what we are trying to do is to get an existing record from the database and change some stuff we want to change, right? And go ahead and save that. So I hope that solves the weird error that we had when we tried to update. Okay, let's try the update one more time. This time I'm going to use the to do with ID 1, and let's just change the status to done. Before I do that, let me find the to do with ID 1. you can see the status is pending. Then I'm going to go over here and change the status to done. Send that, we get done. Let's find the to do again. You can see that the status is now done. All right, let's quickly look at to find all. That is actually straightforward. To find all the to-dos, let me create a method here. Public. This is going to be to do find all and return to do repository. Oh god, not again. Repository dot find all. So this will give us list of to-dos. This will be list of to-dos. Then we can go over to the controller and quickly test this out. I'm going to copy this because they will be similar. This will be in let me call it index. You can call it anything you want. This is not going to take any request body, and down here I want to change this to response. Okay, to do service dot find all and list of to do. This is going to be a get request, so we say get mapping. Make sure to import the list interface. All right, so we have a new endpoint slash to-dos, a get request that should get us all the to-dos in the database. I will head over here and hit send. Oh man, why do I keep getting all this? Restart again. Shit. Okay. Once again, I'm suffering from not setting up the dev tools for auto restart. Okay, I'm going to send the request. We get all the to-dos in the database. Somehow I don't know why this one that had a bug ID turned to 52. And then finally we want to look at how to delete a to-do. For that, I'm going to head over to the service class one more time, and this is going to be straightforward. Oh, we already have the delete to-do endpoint. For the endpoint, I'll come down here and have public. This is going to be response entity. Once again, let's just return a true or false depending on whether or not the to-do was deleted. This is going to be true in all cases, I guess, unless we have an error. So for the endpoint, this is going to be a delete. For the HTTP verb, this is going to be a delete request. It's going to take the ID of the to-do we want to delete, and down here we simply say to-do service.delete, and of course we need at path variable, and the name is going to be ID. We say integer. We call this ID. You can call it anything. To do ID. This ID once again refers to this ID over here, not this guy. And we just say to do ID. We can return response entity dot OK. True. So the to-do should be deleted. Now I will head over to Postman. We try to make a delete request to to-dos slash the ID of the to-do we want to delete. Over to Postman, and we want to, this is for a different tutorial. We want to go to to-dos slash, let me try something that doesn't exist. I will get an error. Why did I get an error? That's very weird. Let me see what's happened there. Okay, delete by ID. So whether or not this is deleted, we cannot even tell. That's why I'm getting an OK. If I want to find it to do before I delete it, I can try to find it and then through an exception, yada yada, all that. But let's go ahead and delete an existing to do. So over here we know that we have this to do with strange ID of 52. I will go ahead and delete that guy. We get a true. Let me see if that to do still exists. Now it is gone. Let's delete one more. The to do with ID 2. Delete to do with ID 2 and find all to do's, and that is gone. Alright guys, so this completes the basic CRUD API that we wanted to accomplish, implement in this tutorial. You can dive deep into the Spring Boot or Spring documentation to learn more about how those magic like AutoWired and stuff works under the hood. I hope this makes sense. Until next time, enjoy coding.